You know, it's often said that our Christian faith is a relationship and not a religion. And human beings from the Garden of Eden to the present day, we end up trying to be more religious than God sometimes. In fact, one writer said that Eve was the first religious person because she added to the Word of God. In addition to eventually disobeying, she actually added to the Word of God when she said to the serpent tempting her, "We cannot eat that fruit or touch it." Throughout history, God has given His people principles and practices in order that their lives might be blessed. But these principles and practices don't save us. God always saves by grace. He always makes a covenant by grace, and then He gives us the pathways to walk in so we can really enjoy the flourishing and prosperity that He intends for us. But oh my goodness, once you go down the religious road, when can you stop? And that's the heart of what Micah is asking in his great book, and especially in chapter 6. Now, Micah is part of what we call the minor prophets sometimes, and I'm going to ask you to change your vocabulary today. These are not minor prophets. These are shorter prophets, because these 12 prophets could all fit on one scroll in the ancient Hebrew scriptures. And so that's why they're often called the 12 by Hebrew scholars, by Jewish scholars. So we're not talking about AAA or AA compared to the major leagues here. We're talking about books that are slightly shorter. Micah is a contemporary of Isaiah, prophesying after the fall of the northern kingdom and before the fall of Judah to Babylon. And God gives Micah amazing revelation of the beautiful future kingdom in chapter 4. Prophetic scriptures about Jesus being born in Bethlehem are found in chapter 5. But in the midst of all of this, in chapter 6, Micah asks the question that we often ask. And that is, God, what do you really expect of me? I know I need to believe. I know on some level I need to behave. But when is enough enough? How much sacrifice? You know, as Christians, we might say, well, how much financial giving? How much Bible reading? How much witnessing? How much sacrifice? How many acts of service? And so our text is so important because it gets to the heart of what God's really looking for. So let's read together this marvelous text that God gave us. And he puts it this way, "O my people, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you?" If God's saying this to Israel, "Answer me, for I brought you up out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery. I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, from God's provision in the wilderness all the way to their consecration under Joshua, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord." And so God's saying, boy, I love you. I've done all this for you. Why do you run away from me? And then the prophet says, okay, Lord, but with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the God on high? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, multiple sacrifices of animals, 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I even give my firstborn? Believe it or not, the pagans around Israel would actually offer their firstborn to the god Moloch and to other fertility deities in order to somehow placate the wrath of the gods. So the prophet is really asking an important question. And then the divine answer comes. He has told you, O man, and that word there is Hebrew for men and women, what is good. And what does the Lord require? But to do justice, to love kindness or mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Micah 6:8 is one of the great summaries of the entire biblical faith. And the Hebrew poetry here is sort of in a reverse order. It's really powerful. But he starts with the practical, do what's right. Do justice. And justice is more than legality. It's being fair, it's being kind, it's giving others a break, it's wanting others to experience all the same privileges that we have. Do what's right. Love kindness, love mercy, have a disposition to forgive and to include and to welcome. But underneath all of this begins with walking humbly with our God. You see, kindness and mercy and justice flow from being in an intimate relationship with the Almighty, the one who is infinite and above the highest heavens, and the one who, Isaiah 55 says, dwells with the humble of heart. Our God is eternal, and He embraces us with deep empathy. Our God is the Almighty, who also in Jesus Christ is the one who's Emmanuel, the God who's with us and will always be with us. One of the great summaries. By the way, Jesus did a similar thing in Matthew 22. Somebody said, tell us about the law. What are the most important commands? And Jesus, echoing Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Micah and others, said, all of the law and the prophets are summed up in loving God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Two great dispositions that lead to different actions and new disciplines in our life. I want you to notice, as we look at Micah again, this order of justice, mercy, and humility. And I mentioned earlier this poetic device, but you see, it's inseparable. We can't just talk about our faith or our belief without looking at actually what we do. James is the great New Testament book. It's almost an entire commentary on the prophets where he says, listen, don't just talk about faith, prove your faith by your deeds. Your deeds don't save you, but your deeds are evidence that God is really working in your life. So where in our lives do we need to be more fair? Where in our lives can we be better advocates for justice? Where in our lives can we give access and opportunity and equity and equality to all people around us? Where in our lives can we be more kind, even to those who aren't kind to us? And where in our lives can we humble ourselves more deeply before the Lord? You know, it's interesting, in both Peter, in 1 Peter and in the book of James, 1 Peter chapter 5 and James chapter 4, the writers remind us that it's humility that brings divine favor and helps us resist the devil. Interestingly enough, God resists the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. I don't know about you, but I think I want to be on the side of those that God gives grace to. And it's not a matter, again, of all our good works or earning our way. It's a matter of whether we're really walking humbly. So Satan has no weapon against humility. When the accuser comes and says, you call yourself a Christian and you did that and you did that, the best thing to do is say, I have an advocate, Jesus Christ, whose blood speaks for my sins, and I have made mistakes, I have erred, but I'm forgiven and I'm loved by God. And you see, that kind of humility just chases away the adversary and allows grace to begin to flow and helps us give grace to others as well. You know, it's so important that we take Micah 6:8 in the midst of such an angry world. I find myself as a public speaker, as a public voice, constantly wanting to move in the opposite spirit. When I hear people angry, I try to do my very best to be kind. When I hear people trying to polarize and try to create division, I look for points of unity. When I hear people trying to compete with each other, I look for points of cooperation. And I would urge us to take Micah's words to heart in our contentious world. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly.